Hey guys, it's Sarah. Today I'm going to be talking about my favorite 14 books that I read in 2014. Now, these are not all necessarily books that came out in 2014. A few of them are. However, these are all books that I actually read this year. Alright, so let's get started. The first book that's my favorite from 2014 is My True Love Gave to Me, a collection of short stories edited by Stephanie Perkins. There were just so many great stories in this book, and I had a really good experience reading it. I enjoyed how it flowed as a collection. I enjoyed the kind of combination of the different holiday stories, the different types of relationships, the fantasy versus the realistic stories. I thought that was all good. I thought it was just really well done and just a really nice, feel-good book. The next favorite book that I read in 2014 is The Queen of the Tearling by Erica Johansson. I listened to this on audiobook, that's why I don't have a physical copy, but I really enjoyed it. I read somewhere that it is a feminist answer to Game of Thrones, and I think that's really accurate. The character development was really spectacular, and it had a lot of interesting plot twists. The protagonist, Kelsey, was an awesome female character. Even if you're not really a fan of fantasy in general, I think you might like this book. It's kind of a nice beginner fantasy book, if you will. The next book that is one of my favorites from 2014 is Shatter Me by Tahira Mafi. Hopefully I'm saying that right. I listened to this on audiobook as well. And I gotta say, by the end of the year, I was a little burnt out on dystopian books. I kind of binge read the Divergent series and the Legend series back to back, and I was kind of getting sick of it. However, Shatter Me was a really good book. The pacing of this book was really fast, and I really wanted to know what was going to happen. Her writing style is really engaging. Warner is one of the most interesting antagonists that I've read this year. I've heard there's kind of a switch in the second and third books in the series where Warner becomes a more sympathetic character. I am very interested to read the rest of the series, which hopefully I will get to sometime this year. There are a lot of series that I've started this year and haven't been able to finish, so hopefully I'll be doing a lot of that in 2015. The next book that I read this year that was one of my favorites is A Great and Terrible Beauty by Libba Bray. I also listened to this on audiobook. This is the first book in the Gemma Doyle series. It's kind of like a Harry Potter that centers around females. I mean, not exactly, but there is that kind of British boarding school experience, and it has a lot of fantasy elements. It's set in the late 19th century, I believe, so that's a little different. But I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed the relationships between the four main girls. I enjoyed how it explored female friendships and relationships. And this is another one where I really need to finish the series. The next favorite on my list is Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. Yet another book that is the beginning of a series I have not finished. This is a young adult fantasy book. I checked it out from my library, which is why I don't have a physical copy. This is another really strong female character protagonist in a fantasy novel. It reminded me a lot of The Queen of the Tearling in style. It didn't really read like a young adult book, I don't think, but I really enjoyed the experience of reading it. There were kind of like mystery aspects where there are these murders going on and you don't know who's committing them. Overall, this book was really exciting and interesting. And I'm definitely going to be finishing this series soon. The next favorite on my list that I read this year is If I Stay by Gail Forman. I actually did a review on this book that I will link to down below, but I really enjoyed the complexity of this book. In particular, I really enjoyed the mother and father characters. I feel like there's a tendency in young adult books to kind of make the parents sort of absent from the story, and they were very much present in the story, which is ironic given the tragedy at the beginning of the story. But I thought it was just really well done and really moving. This book also has a sequel that I will hopefully be getting to in 2015. The next one of my favorites from 2014 is Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Lanny Taylor. This is yet another young adult fantasy series that I need to finish. I really enjoyed Lanny Taylor's writing style. The romance in this book was especially engaging. It had kind of a Romeo and Juliet, forbidden love vibe. I really enjoyed the main character, Carew. I thought she was really interesting. So I'm excited to read the rest of the books in this trilogy. The next on my list of favorites is Codename Verity by Elizabeth Wein. This is another young adult book that doesn't necessarily read like a young adult book. It takes place during World War II. If you are a fan of The Book Thief, you should definitely pick this one up. I listened to it on audiobook. It's about this young woman who's kind of recounting her story from a Nazi prison in World War II when she is captured by the Gestapo, and it's really compelling. The next book on my list is You Are The Placebo by Dr. Joe Dispenza. This is a nonfiction book about the placebo effect and tons of cases that have been documented where people have reversed cancer and other types of illnesses, heart disease, depression, basically anything you can think of, simply with the power of their mind. It's really interesting, and Dr. Dispenza takes you through all of these cases and explains how the placebo effect works. And then he also walks you through how you can use the power of your own mind and your own thoughts and your own beliefs to change your life and your health and the circumstances of your life. It's a really interesting book. I read this one on ebook, and I definitely recommend picking it up. Even if you're not into sort of new age books, this would definitely be a good one to read because he does talk about so much science, and there's just a lot of good information. The next on my list of favorites is Lola and the Boy Next Door by Stephanie Perkins. I also read Anna and the French Kiss by Stephanie Perkins this year, which I also really loved, but I think I love this one a little bit more. I love how Lola has a lot of passions and ambitions of her own, and I love the way that Stephanie Perkins writes the love story. I think it's very believable, very engaging, and it just makes you feel good. Stephanie Perkins writes a lot of really nice, uplifting, cutesy love stories. The next on my list of favorites is Landline by Rainbow Rowell. This is her second adult book, and it's all about a married couple going through kind of difficult times in their marriage. And Georgie, the wife, finds a magical landline phone that allows her to talk to her husband in the past. It's also just a nice kind of feel-good love story, but it deals with staying in love and staying married, and a lot of love stories are more about the beginning of a relationship as opposed to maintaining a relationship. So I thought this was an interesting take on love stories in general. And Rainbow Rowell's writing style is incredible, and she could probably write anything, and I would pretty much love it. The next book that I read this year that was one of my favorites is Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. I just did a longer video discussing the things that I thought about this book, and I will link that down below. But I will also just say that the experience of reading this book was incredible, and I had so much love for these characters. It was kind of hard for me to let them go. The next book is no surprise, and that is Prince Lestat by Anne Rice. I also did a longer video reviewing this book that I will link down below, but I was extremely excited that Anne Rice made a return to the Vampire Chronicles this year, and I love Lestat so much. This book did not disappoint. It was basically everything I wanted it to be, and I loved it. And my favorite book that I read in 2014 is Love Letters to the Dead by Ava de Lara. Pretty sure I'm saying that right. Anyway, do I think this was the best written book of 2014? Probably not. However, the experience of reading this book reminded me of what it was like to be a teenager and what it was like to fall in love for the first time, and it dealt with loss and grief and kind of coming of age and finding out who you are, and it also really reminded me of The Perks of Being a Wallflower. In fact, it might even be a little bit too similar to The Perks of Being a Wallflower. However, I love that book so much, and it reminded me of the way I felt when I was reading The Perks of Being a Wallflower, and it just made me feel things. I couldn't put it down, and I basically just obsessed over it. And so that's why it's my favorite book that I've read this year. Alright, so those are my 14 favorite books of 2014. It was a really great year for reading. There's still a few days left, so I'm trying really hard to make my 50 book goal on Goodreads. But I don't have to work until January 5th, so I think I can do it. Anyway, let me know down below what your favorite books that you read this year are. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and yeah, I will see you guys next time. Bye!